A billionaire heiress crashed into his old truck. She did not know he held her father's last secret. The rain came down in sheets, turning the narrow country lane into a slick ribbon of black asphalt. Elara Vance drove with practiced impatience. Her car, a silent silver dart of German engineering, handled the curves with an expensive disdain for the weather. It was a machine designed for control, a perfect extension of her own will. The world outside the acoustically sealed windows was a blur of green and grey, an inconvenience between her starting point in the city and her destination. She was here to close a deal, the final piece of a puzzle that would secure her company's dominance for the next decade. A parcel of land, unremarkable to most, but geographically perfect for the nerve center of their next-generation data network. The acquisition was a formality, a final signature on a multi-million-dollar contract, an afternoon's work. Her phone buzzed in its cradle, displaying the face of her second-in-command, Marcus. She ignored it. Marcus could wait. Everything could wait until she stood on the soil she was about to own. Possession was the only reality she trusted. She rounded a blind curve, perhaps a little too fast. The truck appeared as if summoned from the earth itself. It was old, dented, and the color of dried mud. It sat squarely in the middle of the lane, its driver's side door ajar. For a split second, her mind registered a man in worn jeans and a dark jacket leaning over a collapsed section of wire fence. There was no time for the horn. Her foot slammed the brake. The car's advanced anti-lock system pulsed violently, fighting the slick road. The vehicle slewed sideways, a graceful, horrifying pirouette of metal and glass. The sound was a dull, expensive crunch, not the screech of cheap tires, but the sickening pop of composite panels yielding to solid steel. Silence followed. The rain drummed on the roof. Elara's hands were locked on the steering wheel. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, trapped thing. She took a breath, then another. She ran a systems check on herself first. No pain, just the sharp, metallic taste of adrenaline. Then she looked at her car. The front passenger side fender was crumpled like a piece of waste paper. The headlight was a shattered eye. It was pressed against the rust-pocked rear bumper of the ancient truck. Anger, cold and immediate, displaced the fear. It was a familiar feeling, a comfortable one. Anger was a tool. She unbuckled her seatbelt and pushed the door open. The rain hit her face, cold and real. Her silk blouse was instantly soaked. Her $4,000 shoes sank into the mud at the edge of the road. The man had not moved. He had straightened up from the fence and was looking at her, his expression unreadable from 20 feet away. He was tall and broad-shouldered, built with the kind of solidness that came from work, not a gym. She strode toward him, her voice clipped and precise, the voice she used for underperforming department heads. "You are in the middle of the road." He watched her approach. He did not seem surprised or apologetic or even concerned. He simply watched. His eyes were a pale, quiet gray. The fence was down, he stated. His voice was low and calm, with a rough edge like unsanded wood. Elara stopped a few feet from him, ignoring the rain plastering her hair to her skull. She gestured impatiently at the two vehicles. "And now, my car is wrecked. We need to exchange information. My insurance will handle it." He glanced from her ruined fender to his own bump, which appeared to have sustained a new scratch among 100 older ones. "Looks like it," he agreed. The sheer lack of reaction was infuriating. She expected shouting or deference, panic or an attempt to assign blame. She did not know how to process this quiet neutrality. "I am Elara Vance," she said, as if the name itself should be enough to accelerate the process. I am on a schedule. He wiped a hand on his jeans, leaving a muddy streak. Caleb Thorne. He did not offer the hand. He just stood there, a fixture of the landscape. She pulled out her phone, ready to take a picture of his license plate. I'm here to see a Mr. Thorne about a land purchase. I assume that's you. He gave a slow nod. This was the man holding up a billion-dollar infrastructure project. This slow, mud-streaked obstacle. Her initial assessment was dismissive. A simple farmer, probably holding out for a few extra thousand, unaware of the scale of the game he was in. Well, Mr. Thorne, this is an unfortunate way to begin our negotiation. She tried to sound reasonable, but the condescension was baked into her tone. Let's be efficient. I'll write you a check for the damage to your truck, say $5,000 to be generous, and you sign the land papers I have in my briefcase. We can forget this happened. His eyes narrowed slightly, the first real change in his expression. It was not anger. It was something closer to appraisal. Land doesn't rush, he said. The statement hung in the air, absurd and profound. I don't have time for philosophy. My car is disabled. I need a tow truck, and I need your signature. Caleb looked past her, at the crushed fender. That car's not going anywhere today. Tow won't come out this far in a storm like this. Not till morning. A wave of cold dread washed over her, colder than the rain. She could not be stranded here. Not here, in the middle of nowhere, with him. That's unacceptable. He shrugged, a small movement of his shoulders. Might be. But it's the truth. He turned his attention back to the fence, as if the conversation and the crumpled luxury car were minor distractions from the real work of the day. He picked up a pair of pliers from the ground. Are you just going to leave me here? The question came out sharper than she intended, a crack in her composure. He paused and looked back at her. His gaze was disconcertingly direct. You're on my land. You won't be left. You can wait at the house. He then did something that completely derailed her train of thought. He reached into the cab of his truck and pulled out a worn, leather-bound journal. It was old, the cover faded and smooth with use. He held it for a moment. You're from Vance Sterling, he said, his eyes on the journal, not on her. My wife, she was interested in your company. In your father. He did not offer the book. He just held it, a silent, unreadable message. My father? Her father had been dead for 10 years. He had co-founded the company, but his partner Sterling had been the face of it for decades. Caleb Thorne finally looked up from the journal, his grey eyes meeting hers. He said your father was a good man, said he lost his way. She thought he was trying to find it again. Before the end, he tapped the cover of the journal. She kept notes, and with that, he tucked the book back into his truck, turned, and went back to twisting a new wire onto the fence post. The conversation, it seemed, was over. Elara stood in the mud, the rain running in rivulets down her face, her world tilting on its axis. The accident was no longer the primary problem. The disabled car was a secondary concern. The primary problem was the quiet man fixing a fence, who held a piece of her past in his calloused hands. The walk to the house was a silent, tense affair. Caleb led the way, his stride long and unhurried. Elara followed, her ruined shoes making sucking sounds in the mud. The farmhouse was old, a simple 2-story structure of white clapboard and dark green trim. It was well kept but unadorned, a building that served a purpose, not a statement. It stood on a slight rise, overlooking fields that rolled away into the mist. He held the door open for her. She hesitated for a fraction of a second before stepping inside, out of the rain. The interior was warm and smelled of wood smoke and coffee. The furniture was solid, made of dark wood, worn smooth with time. Everything was clean, orderly, and deeply lived in. It was the complete antithesis of her own sterile penthouse apartment in the city, a place curated by a designer to look like no one actually lived there. A small girl with Caleb's pale grey eyes and a cascade of dark hair sat at a large wooden table, drawing on a piece of paper with crayons. She looked up as they entered, her gaze serious and direct. She could not have been more than 7 or 8 years old. "This is Lily," Caleb said softly. "Lily, this is Miss Vance." She had some car trouble. The girl, Lily, did not smile. She simply nodded, a miniature version of her father's solemnity. She looked at Ilara's soaked clothes and muddy shoes. "You're wet," she observed. "Yes, I am," Ilara replied, feeling strangely awkward. Caleb went to a closet and pulled out a thick, clean towel and a heavy wool blanket. "You can use the downstairs shower if you want. There are clean clothes in the dryer. My wife's. They'll be too short, but they're dry." The mention of his wife was a casual stone dropped into a still pond. The woman who kept notes. "Thank you," she said, her voice stiff. The towel and blanket would have to suffice. She was not about to put on a dead woman's clothes. She stood by the door, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders, a queen in borrowed wool, feeling utterly displaced. She watched as Caleb moved about the kitchen, his motions economical and sure. He put a kettle on the stove, measured coffee grounds into a press, and moved with a quiet competence that she found both irritating and compelling. Lily went back to her drawing. The only sounds were the hiss of the gas flame and the scratching of the crayon on paper. Ilara's phone had no signal. Of course, it had no signal. The isolation was absolute. She was completely cut off from her world, from her power. Here, she was just a wet woman in a stranger's house. Her lawyer's name was Julian. He was the only person she had told exactly where she was going. He would start to worry when she did not check in. He was methodical like that. Caleb brought a steaming mug to the table and set it in front of her. Coffee. She murmured her thanks and wrapped her cold hands around the warmth of the ceramic. It was black and strong. He sat down opposite her, next to Lily. He looked at his daughter's drawing. It was a picture of the fence, with a stick figure in a dark jacket fixing it. "That's good, Lily Bug," he said, his voice losing some of its rough edge. Lily picked up a silver crayon and carefully drew a long, sleek car crashed into a blocky brown truck. Then she drew a second stick figure, this one with long, stringy hair, standing in the rain. She held it up for her father to see. Caleb looked at the drawing, then at Ilara. A flicker of something, amusement perhaps, crossed his face before it was gone. He nodded at the drawing. Very accurate. Lily slid off her chair and walked over to Ilara. She held out the drawing. "For you." Ilara looked at the piece of paper. It was a child's simple rendering of her current humiliation, and yet it was also a gift, a non-transactional act of connection. It was so foreign to her experience that for a moment she did not know how to react. She took the paper. Her fingers brushed Lily's. The girl's hand was warm. "Thank you, Lily. It's very detailed." Lily gave another solemn nod and returned to her seat. The simple gesture had done what no business negotiation or hostile takeover ever had. It had breached her defenses. Later, as the storm raged outside, Ilara found herself watching Caleb work in a large, attached barn that served as his workshop. He was repairing a piece of farm equipment, his hands moving with a surgeon's precision over the complex machinery. The walls were lined with tools, not just for farming, but for metalworking, woodworking, and electronics. On a large workbench, under a powerful lamp, lay a set of intricate schematics. They were not for a tractor. They looked like blueprints for a distributed network system. "What is that?" she asked, gesturing toward the papers. He glanced at them. "An idea for a more secure way to manage irrigation systems. Off-grid." The explanation was simple, but the diagrams were not. They were complex, elegant, and far beyond the scope of a simple farmer. The math in the margins was advanced cryptography. A cold suspicion began to form in her mind. She made an excuse about needing to try her phone again and walked to the far end of the property where the hill was highest. For a few precious seconds, she got a single bar of service. Just enough. She called Julian. "Elara, are you all right? I was about to call the state police. You missed your check-in. I'm fine. I had an accident. The car is disabled. Julian, I need you to run a name for me. Caleb Thorne. Thorne. He owns the parcel." There was a pause, then the sound of typing. Julian was fast. "Caleb Thorne. He's local, born and raised. Not much public information. Owns that land free and clear. It's been in his family for generations." Wait. He paused again. "What is it, Julian?" "For a few years he was off the grid, but before that, Elara. Are you sure that's the right name?" "Positive." Caleb Thorne was the lead architect for Cerberus Security, the legendary white hat hacking firm. He designed the entire security protocol for the Federal Banking Reserve's digital transfer system. They called him Ghost. He dropped off the map about 8 years ago. Just vanished. The industry chatter was his wife died, and he couldn't handle it. Went back home to the middle of nowhere. Elara looked back toward the farmhouse, the warm light spilling from its windows. The man in muddy jeans, the simple farmer, the quiet father. He was a ghost, a genius hiding in plain sight. Her initial assessment had not just been wrong, it had been laughably, profoundly wrong. She had mistaken a lion for a house cat. "Julian, there's more. He has my father's journal, or his wife's journal about my father." "What? That's impossible. Your father's personal effects were all accounted for." "Apparently not." "Julian, dig into Vance Sterling's activity 8, maybe 9 years ago. Specifically, any land acquisition projects in this region. Look for anything involving my father and Marcus." "Marcus? Why Marcus?" "Because this land, this man, it feels connected. And Marcus is the one who pushed so hard for this specific location. He said it was perfect. Maybe it is. Just not for the reasons he gave me." The line went dead. She walked back to the house, the mud no longer seeming to matter. The game had changed. This was no longer about a simple land deal. It was about a ghost, a journal, and a decade-old secret that was refusing to stay buried. In his glass-walled office overlooking the city, Marcus Thorne ended his call. A smirk played on his lips. His source in the county clerk's office had just confirmed it. Elara Vance's car was disabled, and she was stranded at his brother's farm. Perfect. Caleb had always been a problem. A sanctimonious, self-righteous thorn in his side, even as a child. When Caleb had walked away from a career that could have made him a king, Marcus had felt nothing but contempt. Now, that foolish sentimentality was about to pay dividends. He had pushed for this specific parcel of land for a reason. It was not just geographically ideal, it was poetic. Buying the land that his brother refused to sell, the land where Leah had died, and turning it into the engine of his own ascent to the CEO chair, the irony was delicious. Elara's presence there was an unexpected complication, but also an opportunity. It put both of his obstacles in the same place. He dialed another number, this one for a contact in his company's legal department, a man whose loyalty was to Marcus. not to Ilara. "It's time," he said, his voice smooth as polished stone. "I'm sending you a file, an old agricultural lien against the Thorn property. I need you to file it electronically. Immediately, date it for this morning. It will flag the title as contested." "Is the lien legitimate?" the lawyer asked, a note of caution in his voice. "It's legitimate enough to tie them up in court for a year if they fight it. And they don't have a year. Just file it." He hung up the phone and swiveled his chair to look out at the sprawling city below. Ilara saw business as a series of transactions. She was brilliant at it, but she lacked imagination. She could never see the long game, the personal angles. Marcus saw business as war, and in war, you used every weapon at your disposal. This move would pressure Caleb, showing him that his quiet life was no longer safe. It would also corner Ilara, making her look incompetent for failing to secure a clean title. It would force her to come to him for help, and when she did, he would be ready. The email arrived the next morning. It was from Julian, forwarded from Van Sterling's legal department, a notification of a lien filed against the Thorn property, citing an obscure, decades-old agricultural loan that had allegedly defaulted. The title was now officially contested. The acquisition was frozen. Ilara read the email twice, her coffee growing cold in her hand. It was too fast, too convenient. A legal maneuver like this, dug up and deployed overnight, was not a coincidence. It was an attack. She found Caleb in the barn, calibrating one of the strange devices from his schematics. The morning light streamed through the open doors, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. "They filed a lien against your property," she said, holding out her phone. He took the phone, his large, slightly greasy thumb surprisingly gentle on the screen. He read the legal jargon, his expression unchanging. His jaw tightened. That was the only sign of his anger. "This debt was settled 30 years ago," he said, his voice flat. "My grandfather paid it in cash. The bank went under. The records were lost. It's a fabrication then, a ghost debt." He handed the phone back to her. "A weapon. Someone wants this land badly. Badly enough to play dirty." Her mind went immediately to Marcus, his insistence on this location, his ambition. This had his fingerprints all over it. He was trying to box her in, to make her fail. "This complicates things," she said, stating the obvious. Caleb looked at her, his grey eyes seeming to see right through her corporate armor. "It clarifies things. You came here to buy my home. Now someone is trying to steal it. Whose side are you on, Miss Vance?" The question was direct, stripped of all artifice. It demanded an answer she did not have. Her entire career had been built on being on her own side. Loyalty was a function of utility. "For now, our interests are aligned," she said, the carefully chosen words of a negotiator. "I need the title clean to make the purchase. You need it clean to keep your land." He did not seem impressed by her logic. He turned back to his workbench. "Most people only see what's flowering," he said, picking up a small, delicate tool. "They miss what's moving underneath." The legal attack forced a change. Ilara was no longer a visitor waiting for a tow. She was a strategist trapped on the battlefield. She could not leave. Not until this was resolved. She spent the day on the phone with Julian, her voice a low, urgent murmur as she paced the porch of the farmhouse. They dug into the fabricated lien, tracing its digital signature back through a series of shell corporations until it hit a dead end, a server expertly wiped clean. "It's professional," Julian said, his voice tinny over the weak connection. "Too professional. This isn't some backwater lawyer. This is someone with resources." "It's Marcus," she stated. "It has to be." The house became her unwilling headquarters. She ate meals at the large wooden table with Caleb and Lily. The food was simple: roasted chicken, vegetables from a sprawling garden behind the house, fresh bread. The conversation was sparse. Lily would ask her questions about the city. Are the buildings taller than the trees? Do you have a garden? Ilara found herself answering honestly, describing her life of glass towers and concrete courtyards, and for the first time, it sounded empty, barren in the evenings. After Lily was in bed, the silence between her and Caleb was heavy with unspoken things. She would watch him read or work on his endless projects, his focus absolute. She saw the way his hands, which could dismantle an engine or twist wire, could also gently mend the spine of one of Lily's books. One night, driven by a need to understand, she approached him in his workshop. The air was cool and smelled of oil and sawdust. "Your wife," she said, the words feeling clumsy. "The journal you mentioned. What was she looking for?" Caleb stopped what he was doing. He wiped his hands on a rag and walked over to a locked wooden chest in the corner. He unlocked it and pulled out the leather-bound journal. He did not give it to her. He held it. Her name was Leah, he said. She was a journalist, an investigative one. She believed that what a company did was less important than what it tried to hide. He opened the journal. The pages were filled with neat, dense handwriting. 8 years ago, Vance Sterling tried to buy this land before. It wasn't you. It was another division, run by a young, hungry executive. He was Sterling's prot. My brother. Marcus, the name landed with the force of a physical blow. Of course, the connection was familial. Leah got a tip. Caleb continued, his voice low and devoid of emotion. A man reciting a history he had memorized through pain. The tip was that Marcus's plan wasn't just for a distribution center. It was a cover. They were going to use the remote location to bypass environmental regulations for disposing of toxic byproducts from their microchip manufacturing. This land has a deep aquifer. It would have poisoned the water for the whole valley. He looked up at her, his eyes hollow. Leah found proof. Internal memos, soil sample results from a whistleblower. She compiled it all. She was going to publish it. She had a meeting with your father. She believed he didn't know, that he would stop Marcus if he knew the truth. What happened to your father? He had a heart attack. The day before their meeting. A massive one. Convenient. Ilara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. She remembered her father's last year. He had seemed distant, troubled. He had argued with Sterling, with Marcus. He had talked about changing the company's direction, about its soul. She had dismissed it as the ramblings of a man facing his own mortality. And Leah, she whispered. Caleb's face was a mask of stone. She was driving home from the county records office 2 days after your father died. A car ran her off the road, a sharp curve down by the old bridge. The official report said brake failure. Case closed. He closed the journal. The sound was a soft, final thud. The brother who stole my future, and the company that covered it up. That's what Vance Sterling is to me, Miss Vance. Now you want to buy my land. The land she died trying to protect. Ilara stood in the quiet workshop, the weight of his story pressing down on her. This was not a business problem anymore. It was a wound, a deep, festering wound that her company had inflicted and that her own family was a part of. The name on the letterhead, Vance, was her name. The man trying to steal this land was Marcus, a man she had promoted, whose ambition she had cultivated. She was not an innocent party here. She was the inheritor of the crime. Her choice was no longer about which side she was on. It was about what she was going to do to make it right. The next morning, Ilara was a different woman. The frustration was gone, replaced by a cold, clear purpose. She was no longer a stranded CEO. She was an investigator. She knew Leah's notes and Caleb's story were not enough. A boardroom would dismiss it as the bitter tale of a grieving husband. She needed something irrefutable, something from their world, not his. The police report, she said to Caleb over breakfast, the one that said brake failure. Where is it? Sealed, he answered. The county sheriff at the time was a man named Miller. He retired a year later, moved to Florida. And the car? Scrapped, towed to the local yard run by a man named Gus. Gus died 2 years ago. It's a dead end, Miss Vance. I've been down all these roads. Ilara looked at him. But you're not a lawyer, and you're not the CEO of the company that did this. I am. She spent the morning with Julian on a secured line, her voice low and commanding. He was no longer just her lawyer. He was her operative. Julian, I need you to find Sheriff Miller. I don't care where he is in Florida. I also need every file on the original Vance Sterling proposal for this land from 8 years ago. The one Marcus ran. I want budgets, engineering specs, environmental impact statements, especially the ones that were never filed. And I need you to create a secure, isolated server. A digital vault. We're building a case against Marcus. Julian's voice was tense. Ilara, this is not just a corporate maneuver. This is accusing a board member of conspiracy and potentially accessory to murder. If you're wrong, I'm not wrong, she cut him off. And if I am, the company I'm running is already rotten. Now get to work. Her next stop was the town, a small, sleepy collection of buildings that had not changed much in 50 years. She drove Caleb's old truck, handling the rumbling manual transmission with a surprising degree of competence she had not known she possessed. She was looking for the ghost of a man named Gus, the mechanic. She found his legacy in a small diner with worn vinyl booths and a counter tended by a woman with kind eyes and hair the color of snow. The sign outside said, Agnes's Place. Ilara sat at the counter and ordered coffee. The woman, Agnes, slid a heavy white mug in front of her. You're the one staying out at the Thorn Place, she said. It was a statement, not a question. News traveled fast here. I am, Ilara said. I was a friend of Gus's. My father used to bring his car to him. It was a lie, but a plausible one. Agnes's expression softened. Gus was my husband. Been gone 2 years now. Best mechanic in 3 counties. Ilara took a slow sip of coffee. She had to tread carefully. I heard he was the one who looked at Leah Thorne's car. After the accident. The warmth in Agnes's eyes cooled instantly. That was a long time ago. It was a bad business, Ilara said softly, looking into her mug. A young woman like that. I was told it was the brakes. Agnes polished the clean counter with a cloth, her movements stiff. That's what the report said. Ilara looked up, meeting the older woman's gaze in the mirror behind the counter. She let the silence stretch. She was good at using silence. It was a tool, like money or power. Gus was a good mechanic, Agnes said finally, her voice barely a whisper. He knew brakes. He knew them better than he knew his own name. He was a proud man. And an honest one. Ilara waited. Sometimes, an honest man is asked to do a dishonest thing, Agnes continued, her back still to Ilara. For his family. To keep his business from being ruined by lawsuits he can't afford. To keep people from getting hurt. The implication was clear. Gus had been threatened. He signed the report, Agnes said. But it cost him something. It broke a piece of him that never mended. Agnes turned around. She dried her hands on her apron and looked at Ilara, her eyes searching, weighing. "You're from that company." "Vance Sterling. Leah was investigating you." "Yes. Are you here to finish the job? Or to fix it?" "To fix it," Ilara said, the words feeling more true than anything she had said in years. Agnes studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. "Finish your coffee." 15 minutes later, Ilara followed Agnes to a small house behind the diner. Agnes led her to a dusty attic, the air thick with the smell of old paper and memories. From a locked footlocker, she retrieved a small grease-stained notebook. "Gus kept a private log," she said, her hand trembling slightly as she held it out. "For every job." The official invoice said one thing. This book told the truth. He wrote down what he really found. For his own peace of mind, Ilara took the notebook. It felt heavier than it should. He said the brake line wasn't worn or faulty. It was cut, cleanly, and there were tool marks on the fitting that didn't match his. Someone tampered with it. Someone who knew what they were doing. He wrote it all down. Then a man in a suit from your company paid him a visit. Gus signed the official report that said brake failure. He kept this. He told me to burn it if anyone ever asked. "Why didn't you?" Ilara asked gently. "Because truth doesn't burn," Agnes replied. "It just waits." Driving back to the farm, Ilara held the final piece of the puzzle in her hands. The mechanic's notebook. It was the key. The objective, physical evidence that transformed Caleb's story from a tragic memory into a criminal complaint. When she got back, Caleb was waiting on the porch. He watched her pull up, get out of his truck, and walk toward him. He saw the look on her face. "You found something," he said. She held up the small, stained notebook. "I found the truth." Now, she had everything she needed. Leah's research, the fabricated lien, the trail leading to Marcus, and now the mechanic's confession from the grave. She had the motive, the means, and the cover-up. She spent the next 48 hours in a storm of activity. She and Caleb worked side by side at the large kitchen table. He, the digital ghost, traced the faint electronic footprints of Marcus's conspiracy, recovering deleted emails and tracking the money flow for the frivolous lien. She, the corporate strategist, assembled the narrative, preparing the documents and marshalling her forces. She was no longer just the CEO. She was the architect of a reckoning. She used the tools of her world, the lawyers, the data analysts, the intricate knowledge of corporate bylaws, not for profit, but for justice. "Julian," she said in her final call to him, "call an emergency meeting of the board. The reason is a hostile takeover attempt of a key corporate asset. And get security ready." The boardroom was on the 50th floor, a sterile chamber of glass and steel, with a view that stretched to the horizon. It was Ilara's natural habitat, a place where she had always been in complete command. The board members filed in, their faces a mixture of curiosity and concern. They were powerful men and women, accustomed to predictable quarterly reports, not emergency meetings. Marcus Thorne was the last to arrive. He walked in with an air of confident arrogance, a slight smirk on his face. He believed he had her cornered. He believed this meeting was about her failure to secure the data center land. He was there to watch her fall. He stopped short when he saw who was sitting at the far end of the table, next to the empty chair reserved for the CEO. Caleb Thorne sat in silence. He wore clean work clothes, dark jeans, and a simple button-down shirt. He did not look out of place. He looked solid, immovable, a piece of the bedrock that the glass tower was built upon. His presence in this room was a profound disruption, a question that hung in the silent, conditioned air. Marcus's smirk faltered. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. "What is he doing here, Elara?" Elara did not answer. She walked to her seat at the head of the table and placed a single thin file in front of her. "Good morning," she began, her voice calm and even. "I called this meeting because I have uncovered a series of actions that represent a grave threat to the integrity and future of this company." She paused, letting her eyes sweep across the faces at the table. "For the past several weeks, I have been overseeing the acquisition of a parcel of land for our next-generation data project. The project was championed, and its location selected, by Mr. Marcus Thorne." Marcus shifted in his seat, his confidence returning. "A project which, I hear, has run into some significant legal snags. A failure of due diligence, perhaps, on the contrary," Elara replied, her voice turning to ice. "My diligence has been exhaustive. It has uncovered, for instance, a fraudulent lien filed against the property, designed to obstruct the sale. A lien digitally traced back to a shell company funded through one of Marcus's own discretionary accounts." The room went silent. The board members looked from Elara to Marcus. "That's a baseless accusation," Marcus snapped, his face flushing. "Is it?" Elara opened the file. She did not raise her voice. She simply presented the facts, one by one, like a surgeon laying out her instruments. She detailed the original land deal from 8 years ago. She presented the environmental reports that Leah Thorne had compiled, showing Marcus's intent to illegally dump toxic waste. She projected the recovered emails from his server, his own words discussing the containment of the journalist problem. With every new piece of evidence, Marcus's composure crumbled. The color drained from his face. He began to sweat. "This is ancient history. A fabrication by a disgruntled employee who died years ago." He stammered, looking around the table for support. He found none. The faces were cold, calculating. They were assessing risk, and he had become a liability. Then Elara played her final card. "The death of Leah Thorne was ruled an accident," she said, her voice dropping slightly. "Brake failure. But the mechanic who inspected the car, a man named Gus, was pressured into signing that report." She slid a small, grease-stained notebook across the polished table. It stopped directly in front of the lead director. "This is his private log from that day." He wrote down the truth. The brake line was cut. A collective gasp went through the room. This was no longer about corporate malfeasance. This was something far darker. Elara looked directly at Marcus. Her expression was not one of triumph. It was one of grim finality. And finally, she said, "We have the man who paid Gus the visit. The man who threatened him. He was a junior executive in your department at the time, Marcus, a man fiercely loyal to you. He is currently in a conference room downstairs with our general counsel and 2 detectives from the state police. He has already given a full confession." Marcus Thorne broke. He stood up so quickly his chair fell backward with a crash. "She's lying. This is a coup. She's trying to consolidate power." But his eyes were wild with panic. He looked at the door, as if contemplating a run. Caleb had not moved. He had not said a word. He just watched his brother, his face a granite mask of sorrow and judgment. The lead director picked up the phone in the center of the table. Security, 2 uniformed guards entered the room. They walked to Marcus, their faces impassive. "Mr. Thorne, please come with us." Marcus looked from the guards to Elara, his face a contorted mess of hatred and disbelief. You did this." "No," Elara said quietly. "You did." They escorted him from the room. The door clicked shut, leaving a profound silence in its wake. Elara stood and addressed the stunned board. "The data center project on the Thorne property is cancelled, effective immediately. Instead, I am proposing that Vance Sterling establish a $30 million environmental trust to protect the watershed in that valley. It will be named the Lear Thorne Foundation. Furthermore, we will be funding an independent grant for investigative journalism, ensuring that voices like hers are never silenced again. She looked at each of them. This company was founded on innovation and integrity. Somewhere along the way, under our watch, we lost sight of that. Today, we start the process of earning it back. She did not wait for a vote. She knew she had won. This was not just a victory. It was a purge. She had cut the cancer out of her own company. She turned and walked to the end of the table where Caleb stood. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw the wall of his grief begin to crack. There was no victory in his eyes, only a deep, painful relief. "Thank you," he said. The two words held the weight of 8 years of darkness. She simply nodded. It was not over. But it was a beginning. Months passed. The autumn that had begun with a crash in the rain gave way to the stark silence of winter, and then the slow, tentative green of spring. The world of Vance Sterling changed. The news of Marcus Thorne's arrest and the subsequent revelations sent shockwaves through the industry. Ilara navigated the fallout with a steady hand, but her focus was different. She was restructuring not for growth, but for health. She promoted people of principle, not just ambition. She made the Lear Thorne Foundation the centerpiece of the company's new identity. Her own life changed more quietly, but just as profoundly. She sold the sterile penthouse apartment with its panoramic views of a city she no longer felt connected to. She delegated the day-to-day operations of the company to a trusted successor, retaining her seat as chairwoman, but shedding the title of CEO. She was no longer interested in running the machine, only in ensuring it ran right. One bright morning in late May, she found herself driving north, out of the city. The car was different this time. A practical, sturdy SUV, not a silver dart. There was a bag in the back with a few changes of clothes and a box of professional-grade crayons for Lily. She drove without impatience, watching the landscape change from concrete and steel to rolling hills and green fields. She knew the way by heart. She turned onto the narrow country lane. The fence that Caleb had been mending was now straight and strong, a clean line dividing the road from the pasture. She pulled up to the farmhouse and killed the engine. The quiet settled around her, a comfortable blanket. Caleb was on the porch, sitting in a rocking chair, a cup of coffee in his hand. He watched her get out of the car. He was not surprised. It was as if he had been waiting. He did not get up. He just gave a small, slow nod of welcome. The screen door creaked open, and Lily ran out, her dark hair flying behind her. She did not shout or rush. She stopped at the bottom of the steps and held up a piece of paper. A new drawing. Ilara walked over and knelt down to look at it. This one was not of a car crash. It was a picture of 3 stick figures, a tall man, a woman with long hair, and a small girl. They were standing together by a fence, under a bright yellow sun. Ilara's throat felt tight. She took the drawing. "It's beautiful, Lily, thank you." Lily finally smiled, a wide, bright smile that transformed her serious face. Caleb stood up and walked down the steps. He gestured with his head toward the far pasture. "That section of fence by the creek needs checking before I let the cows in." It was not a command. It was an invitation. She nodded. They walked together, with Lily skipping between them. The air was warm and smelled of damp earth and new grass. When they reached the fence line, Caleb handed her a pair of heavy work gloves from his back pocket. Then he picked up a tensioning tool. He showed her how to check the wires, how to find the places where the winter had loosened them. He explained the mechanics of it with the same quiet precision he used to describe a cryptographic algorithm. She listened, her mind, so used to complex market analyses and legal documents, focusing on the simple, tangible reality of the task, the feel of the wire, the resistance of the wood, the solid weight of the tool in her hand. He pointed to a loose staple on a post. He held out the hammer he was using. Her hand brushed against his as she took it. The contact was brief, accidental, but not. A current passed between them, quiet and powerful. It was the first time they had touched without the buffer of a coffee mug or a piece of paper. She held the staple in place. He stood close, his presence a solid warmth at her back. She swung the hammer. The strike was clean, sure, the staple bit deep into the wood. They worked their way down the fence line, in a comfortable, shared silence, their movements falling into an easy rhythm, repairing what was broken, making it strong again. The sun was high in the sky. Lily sat in the grass, drawing a picture of a bird on a wire. Elara paused and looked out across the land, the green fields, the quiet house on the hill, the man working beside her. This was the asset she had come to acquire. She had just been wrong about what it meant to own it. Some fences are built to divide a property. Others are built to define a home.